Hi, everyone. My name is Kristen Brown. I am the behavior manager at the Lynchburg Humane Society, and I am here to talk to you about how we adjusted our communication techniques when we were interacting with our intake diversion techniques. This was when I took over our intake department over 2023 to 2024. So for just a little bit of context, the Lynchburg Humane Society is in Lynchburg, Virginia. We are a 501(c)(3) nonprofit private animal shelter with government contract. We do practice managed intake and have a number of well-established programs that had been in place for years prior to me taking over the intake department. In 2024, we took in over 3,000 pets and adopted out over 2,500, just to frame our usual intakes. Okay, so the problem with our pet help department or our intake team, we like a lot of well-established programs already, and when I took over, I thought I would be adding a few new ones. Even though we did that, we actually found that the core issue that was really hindering our pre-existing programs was how we were communicating with the public. So we had things like low staff morale because we were having negative interactions. Most of our staff members were not approaching these interactions from a customer service standpoint so much as like a bodyguard to the shelter. They felt like they had to be bouncers because they were the first line of defense to the shelter, and they were bringing that energy into their interactions with the community members that they were talking to. This led to stressful interactions and a lot of confrontational engagement. So things like as soon as somebody walked in the door, they were ready to tell them no, give a very low level or limited explanation as to why, and just focus on sending them on their way instead of giving them resources to help solve their problem. And they weren't coming at it with negative intentions from their perspective. They were helping the pets. And I think a lot of us in intake departments tend to fall into this habit of just jumping straight into intake diversion and sticking to our intake policies without really meeting the people where they are, focusing on their problems, hearing them out, and coming to a mutually beneficial solution. So a result of this is that our intake diversion wasn't as effective as it could be because we weren't really collaborating with the community in an effective way. And at the end of the day, our community's problems and our community's perspective is what most directly impacts the pets in our care and outside of our care. So just to frame the problem that we were working on, this was when I realized it was less about programs and more about communication and lack of compassion in our communication. I was standing at the front desk with a staff member, and a woman walked in the door with a large dog. And I felt the tension rise in this staff member. Her body got tense, her eyes got wide, and I heard her whispering under her breath, no, 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 we are absolutely not taking that dog in. And you could see that this woman who was walking up with her dog was feeding off of some of that energy, and she was hesitant with us and then said that she was here for her public rabies vaccine appointment, which we could absolutely help her with. It was on the calendar. We knew she was coming in, and I watched the energy shift and the mindset shift from how can I get this person to leave and how can I get this pet out of the shelter to customer service. Oh, yeah, of course I can help you with that. And the body language changed. And I realized in that moment, if we really wanted intake diversion to be effective, we had to start from a customer service perspective and start with compassionate communication instead of meeting them immediately with intake diversion. So in sum, we really needed to watch our tone. We had to change how we were approaching these conversations. To kind of walk you through what this process looked like for us, first, I'm going to talk about just how we adjusted our communication and some of the techniques that we used there, and then follow up with how we helped our staff implement some of those changes, because learning something different about communication is one thing, but actually applying it is a whole different issue, especially in a field like animal welfare, where there's a whole lot of work to get done and a whole lot of people to talk to. So how do we actually implement some of these changes effectively? So the first step, going back to that example with the staff member and the woman who came in the door, the core of that problem was that we were never really listening to her. Saw her come in and made some assumptions about why she was here. So the first thing we can do is start by actively listening to the people who are coming in with pets. That way we can understand what they're doing here and also do a better job of assuming the best. Instead of assuming that that person is here to surrender their pet, or even if they are, assuming that they're there because they're not interested in the pet's well-being or because they don't care about the pets, assuming the worst in those ways, we can instead assume the best of them and think we are on the same team, we are collaborative, they do want the best for the pet, they are willing to hear us out. And it just helps us get into a mindset that's much more open to how the conversation can set us up on the same team. So, assuming the best when they walk in the door and throughout the conversation, and then also hearing them out, asking questions, listening to the whole situation. Regardless of what brought them here, let's make sure that we can really understand where they're coming from. In a lot of intake situations, it's not really pet problems so much as circumstances impacting the person that have brought them to this decision where they feel like they can no longer take care of a pet. Or it might even just be lack of information. They don't know what techniques are out there to help the pet, but we do. So we just have to listen to everything that they're talking about, get a good idea of where they're coming from, and then use that to inform how we can guide the conversation moving forward. Then, if we've really listened to them, we should be prepared to restate what they said, doing justice to what they said as well. So not just the high points, but really focusing in on what their problem is and what their goal is, and also try to find something that we can affirm. Most of the time, there's something that they said that we can really latch on to and work with. There are good intentions there. Nobody really wants to come in and just do terrible things today. There's something good about their history with the pet, their goal in walking through the door, what they want out of the problems that they're trying to work through, how we might be able to help them. There are all these things that we can affirm and build off of in our conversations. So here are some examples we can work through. Somebody comes in and says, I'm moving today and I can't bring my pets. I know anybody who has worked in intake has had this scenario, and a lot of the times our reflex is to think, why did you wait so long? Now, that's already putting us into a negative state of mind, a combative state of mind, and it's not going to lead to a collaborative conversation. Instead, we can assume the best and say maybe they waited as long as they did because they really don't want their pet to be in a shelter environment. And that's something that I can work with. We don't want their pet in the shelter environment either. They just didn't know what opportunities were out there, and there could still be opportunities where we can help them as long as we can really focus in on that positive intention there. Also, moving is really stressful for anybody who's had to do that. It can feel overwhelming. And I think when things are overwhelming, we just try to get something off of our plate. And so I can keep that in mind as I'm talking to them to reestablish that connection they have with their pet and hopefully ease some of what's stressing them through the process. Another scenario here is my landlord said my dog barks too much and I might get evicted. Something I can affirm about that is that dog barking, even if it's a natural behavior, can also be a bit of a nuisance and it can lead to major problems. It's not fun to get evicted. It's really scary to not know where you're going to live. And some people don't have the flexibility to just go find another place. So they take those considerations very seriously, and we should too. That's where they're going to spend their time. That's where they're going to sleep at night. That's where they're going to raise their family. So we need to be mindful of how weighty that situation can be and then orient our solutions around easing some of those concerns. I can't give my pet enough attention. Now, I know so many of us are working in the shelter field, and we know, despite our best efforts, how much attention shelter pets typically get in a day is not much at all. Really not comparable to pets who are in a home, unfortunately, again, despite best efforts. But this person who came in doesn't know that. What I can gather from this, by assuming the best, is that they really do care about their pet's quality of life. And that's something that I can talk about later in our conversations to help them see what other options might also benefit the pet's quality of life. This isn't the only way to improve that. So those are just some examples of how we can actively listen and put ourselves into a more positive state of mind by assuming the best and really hearing people out. So once we've listened to everything, I found it's also helpful to work on restoring connection. So that's restoring the connection that they have with their pets and also restoring connection just with us. When people come in with an expectation that we are going to accept that pet, and it turns out that's not the solution we are going to go with, it can be frustrating and it can feel combative, as if we're not on their team, we're just another adversary or another stressor in their life. So I want to make sure early on in the conversation they know that I'm not turning them away. I'm giving them resources. I'm here to help find them a solution, and I'll continue to support them along whatever that process looks like for them. They're not alone. They're not being sent out. We're not bodyguards or bouncers trying to guard the shelter. We're looking for mutually beneficial solutions that can ease their stress and solve problems without the pet coming into the shelter. So I'm keeping those connections in mind. One step of this process that I think is very helpful is focusing on de-escalation. With intake situations, you never really know what you're going to get because you see people and circumstances that vary so dramatically. So for example, in the course of an afternoon, you could interact with one of your top donors. You could interact with somebody experiencing homelessness. You could experience somebody who is in the process of moving. You could talk with somebody who is about to be deployed. You have all these different life circumstances that are impacting their pets. And because life circumstances have led them here, life circumstances are stressful. Emotional states are probably heightened and most likely have been long before they walked through the door. So giving them a safe space and a safe conversation to just come down a couple notches and decompress is so crucial, because again, I don't want to come off like just another problem or just another stressor adding to their plate. I want to be on their team, and I want them to feel like they can really trust that I'm here to help them with this part of what's troubling them. Co-regulation can be helpful with this. A lot of that, I think, is just self-awareness and having some good regulation skills in yourself. So things like taking some deep breaths, making sure that if the person is coming in with a heightened emotional state, that you're not going up with them. If they're high, you're low. If they're antsy, you're nice and calm and still, and hopefully creating an environment just by in yourself making sure you exemplify calmness in the conversation, hearing them out, letting them kind of vent to you and get it all out just to help soothe some of the intensity that they might be feeling from their situations. And then finally, focusing on relationships. So like I said, this is both the relationship they have with their pet and the relationship they have with us. So with their pet, or whatever pet they brought into the shelter, by the time they walk through the doors, it's almost as if they feel like that relationship is already done. So if you find a stray and you bring them to the shelter, you think this is the last stop. This is where I drop the pet off. If you're considering surrendering the pet and you come in with the pet, most of the time those people are strongly believing they're not going to leave with their pet. So there's already been a little bit of grieving there and some separation. So I need to try to reestablish that relationship as I'm talking with them early on to try to help them see that this is a pet that they care about. This is a pet that they have provided for. And this is a pet that they are invested in. and that they can continue to be invested in. It's not gone. That relationship is very much so still real and still in front of them. And then again, their relationship with us, making sure they know that I hear them and that I support them and that I also can empathize with whatever situation they're working through right now. So here are just some examples saying things like, I hear you. I can see how much you love your pet. What's your pet's name and how'd you pick it? So just again, tapping into that long history that they might have with the pet. It sounds like you're really trying to do the right thing. I think a lot of people come into the shelter and already feel like they are doing something wrong or there's room for judgment. And we want to make sure that they're not receiving any of that from us. If they're feeling that, I want to put that at ease because we are here as a resource to the community, whatever they need. We're here to help them work through their problems. Even if that's not intaking the pet today like they might have expected, we are here to support them. And we don't think that they are horrible people or whatever they might be feeling by coming to us for help. We're here to support them, and they are making a good decision by reaching out. This is also not a direct script. It shouldn't be used as like anything to be manipulative. This is oftentimes just pointing out things that are happening in front of you so that you can make sure that they're seeing things that are happening. So if the pet continues to check back in with them, just point it out. If they've given you all the details and been very forthcoming about what the situation is and what they're struggling with, thank you. I hear you. It's just pointing out the little things that are happening in front of your eyes to help them see the connections that are in front of them, both with you and with their pet. Okay, so once we have listened to the whole story and then work to restore some connection and make sure they understand that we're on their team, that the pet is still on their team, and that we can collaborate effectively, that's when we can take the final step into our intake diversion. And again, if we really did a good job listening and asking questions and building off of that connection that they have, then we should be able to orient toward their goal in a way that presents whatever intake diversion technique we want to use toward their problem. So if they're concerned about their landlord, we can provide a landlord letter that says, we're working on it. We are collaborating with this individual and their pet to come up with a solution so that everybody's happy. We can also use orienting toward their goal just as we are giving stats on the effectiveness of programs and selecting which programs we want to offer to them so that we can make sure that we are proving and following up on trying to work them through their problem. We can also share the intake diversion strategies with them more directly. Once we have kind of oriented everything into their problem, we can go ahead and just give them all of the details and resources and have them on hand, things like handouts, things like pamphlets, follow-up emails, everything that they have so that they can reference this stuff very easily and get all the information about the programs that we do have to support them. Also, at this stage, I think it's important to be able to back up the programs. We don't want anybody to feel like we are just throwing things out there that we came up with. I want to ground this stuff in data and stats and in the broader field of animal welfare so that they know that they really are getting the best resources that we can offer, that we're not just coming up with things to get them to go out the door, that these are real resources that exist across the country to try to help other people who are going through the exact same thing as them. Okay, putting it all together, here's that situation with I'm moving today and I can't bring my pets. The affirmative part is moving is very stressful. And also I'll add to that, I really do appreciate that they waited this long because they don't want their pet in the shelter environment. If we want to restore connection, we can mention something about how they took great care of their dog and using the dog's name directly just to help try to reconnect them to them. And then also adding on to I can see that you really don't want your pet to end up in a shelter environment. I really appreciate that. And then finally, the intake diversion techniques, we're happy to help. Here's how. And that's where we can build off of the information that we've gathered for the exact timeline of things. Where are they going? Why can't you bring their pet? Is there anything in there that I might be able to solve so that you can bring your pets with you? What about a temporary doggy daycare boarding situation? What about a friend or family member? We can work together to try to delay this intake long enough for us to bypass the shelter through other programs. So now that we've talked through the communication technique, which I kind of formed it in almost like a step-by-step, but it is very fluid because we're talking with people. So people aren't robots. We don't follow formulas. It's important to kind of use all of the steps all together and keep them all in mind. Find opportunities to affirm and assume the best. Find opportunities to listen more. And don't get too hung up on just pushing intake diversion. But now that we have those options for communicating with more compassion and empathy, we also have to help our staff implement those communication techniques. So, change implementation. First things first, change is way more than an email. We can't just send a little chat out to the staff and say, we will now communicate with more compassion. It just doesn't work like that. And even if it wasn't a communication technique, any new program, any new change is going to be uncomfortable. And in a field as busy as ours, people are so quick to revert back to whatever feels comfortable. Even if you've convinced them that this could be more effective, it's harder to do something that you're not as familiar with. So we always have to follow up. It's a lot of support. It's looking at all the different ways we can really integrate and embed the change into the staff and the day-to-day and the culture in general, so that it's clearly here to stay and it's our new default way of thinking. Our approach is no longer trying to send people away as soon as they come through the door. It's how can we help you? And so we're going to embed that into our culture and then also continue to follow up with it as more staff come in, as time goes on, as things get busier, as things get slower. So this was really a culture shift. We had to change what our natural impulse was and really rethink how our department fits into the mission and how our department interacts with our community. And also just what they think their role is in our mission. So we had to reorient toward our LHS mission and really drive home how this individual department contributes to that mission. So the LHS mission is leading the way in providing a compassionate, safe community for animals and people through progressive life-saving programs, services, resources, and education. We needed to help them see how they fit in with this and how this communication strategy can benefit and pursue that mission further. Okay, changing the department. So again, we decided we were going to do a culture change. We wanted to really change the image and the default position of what the staff members felt they should be doing with the public and what their role was toward the mission. So we changed their name. Instead of pet help, they became community resource counselors because ultimately, to help pets, we're really helping the community, especially in the intake department. We're working through people-oriented problems, things like housing, finances, life circumstances. All of these things are contributing to people's ability to care for their pets and whether or not they feel they need the pet to enter a shelter environment. So community resource counselors became the new name. We also created a statement of purpose. which is listed below. The purpose of the LHS Pet Help Team is to exhaust all resources to reunite or keep pets with their owners, prevent pets from unnecessarily entering the shelter environment by offering alternative solutions to pet owners, and ensure all incoming pets are set up for long-term success and speedy pathways out of the shelter environment. So it's very resources driven. It's all about trying to provide alternatives to the community so that we're not in a mindset of turning them away. We're providing alternative solutions. We are working to solve their problems alongside them rather than send them away. We set new expectations with our staff. So this part was really clarifying they hadn't done anything wrong previously. We just wanted to try something different. We wanted to be more intentional about how we were interacting with the community in the hopes of improving morale, improving the success of our programs, the effectiveness of our intake diversion, and ultimately how satisfied they would feel from their interactions. Nobody really likes having frustrating altercations with people in customer service. That's not an enjoyable position. So we wanted this position to feel much more fulfilling and helpful. This also meant that things that had been really important in the past were going to shift. So I had to explain that the email inbox might not always be completely cleared out all the time because we are going to be much more detailed in our email responses. We're going to ask more questions. Those threads are probably going to be longer. It might be more time consuming. It might mean that we don't answer everybody within a few hours, but that's okay because the quality of the responses that they're getting are going to go up. We're really going to be working to solve those problems. But I needed the staff to understand and know that there was room for that. And then, of course, we had to support them with plenty of training opportunities so that they really had the opportunity to understand and practice these communication techniques over and over and over again so that it could become the default disposition to them. Also, while I didn't list it here, we also created a separate space for our surrender consults or any conversations that were heading into a more sensitive direction, because you never really know. Sometimes any intake situation can become a little bit more personal, a little bit more emotional. So a separate space that's not the front lobby or the adoption desk where people could have some privacy to talk to us went a really long way for helping to improve the quality of those conversations and also lowering the defensiveness that we were sometimes experiencing, which also it is unimaginably difficult to air out some of these personal details in the middle of a lobby where other people can hear you. So I know we're always tight on space, but if you can spare somewhere for people to sit one-on-one, it definitely went a long way to help us. So going back to some of those training opportunities, practice makes perfect. We had lots of online resources. There are some written works out there that talk about conflict resolution. Karen Green has an excellent resource on that. Shadowing was very helpful. So bringing staff along to watch conversations, especially if you already have some people who are really confident in those situations, are really good at de-escalating, just have kind of a warm and fuzzy disposition that helps bring people's guards down, anything like that, or even people who just navigate those conversations without it impacting them too much. It's really helpful to be able to see and hear this actually happening with real community members. Scenarios in a hat was really fun to play. So we would write down scenarios of intake situations and create little personalities to go alongside them just to practice our intake conversation. So things we can affirm, how we can listen, what are some follow-up questions we should ask, and assuming these are how the answers go, what would the decision be? What resources would we offer and how would we talk about them? Role playing, I think, really just depends on the staff. Some people love it, some people are uncomfortable with it. But again, I think any opportunity you have to really talk through these things in practice will only make it feel more natural when you're doing it in the real situation. And then finally, the opportunity to tag out. So if you're in a conversation and it's just not going well, It feels combative, it's stressful, you know that you're not able to either implement the community or the conversation points that we were talking about earlier, the communication technique, or maybe that person is just in a really heightened emotional state and it's just not coming down. It is totally fine to tag out, get another person in. I've often found that getting that second person in sometimes is all it takes to de-escalate at least a little bit. I think it's easy in a heightened emotional state for that first person to really struggle to take it back down because you're not giving them whatever they came in expecting to get, which is usually us intaking the pet. We're not meeting an expectation, and that can be very defeating and frustrating in the context of already emotional situations. So having the opportunity to get another team member in there, getting a manager in there to restart and also reiterate some of the things that you were saying can help bring things down a couple notches. Here are some of the results that we experienced after we implemented this. So we did have fewer negative interactions. There's always going to be some. It's customer service, it's animal welfare, emotions are always heightened. So there's going to be some that are still just challenging situations with people. But we were experiencing that in the majority of our conversations. And after this, I'd say it's only on rare occasions that we have really negative interactions. Because of this, it improves staff morale. It is so much easier to feel like you're helping people when people also feel helped. So we were able to restore some of those community relationships and build confidence in those interactions. Stronger connection to the mission. Our staff members really understood how they were helping in this situation because it can be so hard to be on the intake team where you're the one who's not giving people what they want or expected when they came in, and you're also not the one who is able to, help that pet escape the shelter. You're the one who's going to bring them to their kennel for their first time. There's a lot of weight to that. So being connected to the mission was really helpful for the staff to understand that they are really helping us. And then we did find that our programs were more successful. People were more willing to do things like Finder to Foster, and they were using our supportive resources that we had available to them. Here's some examples. So our pet food pantry is a pantry with donated food so that community members who are struggling or unable to provide food for their pets have an option to get some free food from us just to get by. And you can see on these little charts here that there was an upward trend of usage. So in that summer, fall of 2023 was when we implemented these changes, and the usage went up all the way through 2024 and just continues to be used and depended on by the community, which is awesome. That's exactly what that program was there for. Our intakes were also on a downward trend, so we were much more equipped to use our intake diversion techniques consistently and having more positive outcomes from those. Whereas when we were having really frustrated situations, it was harder to really stand by our policies because we would kind of hit a standstill with the community, and we didn't want to be in that situation. So having more collaborative conversations meant that people were more willing to try alternative programs like rehoming and not pushing so hard for sooner appointments or emergency surrender situations. In addition to having compassionate communication, enhancing our intake diversion just with our regular programs, we also were able to have much more transparent and honest conversations about things like behavior euthanasia and quality of life of shelter pets. So here's a quick example. This sweet girl is Hazel, and when she had a brief stay in the shelter, she was completely shut down, completely unhandleable. We were extremely grateful when her owners were able to come back and take her home, because we just weren't sure what her trajectory was going to look like. She wasn't responding well to our attempts at helping her open up, helping to lower her stress. She wouldn't take medication. She got sick and we had to isolate her. So it was just a horrible short shelter stay for her. Then she went home, and unfortunately, after that, her owners felt it was best that she find a different home. And I should also mention her in-home behavior was significantly better than her in-shelter behavior. She had minor separation anxiety and some destructive behaviors because of that, but otherwise was very sweet, very friendly, virtually no concerns. So unfortunately, her owners felt it was best to find her a different home. And when they talked to us about surrender, I was able to have a lengthy conversation with them about why, about what their circumstances were, and also about what that would do to Hazel and the likely long-term trajectory if we weren't able to work with her, if she was unresponsive, if she's completely shut down by shelter stress. That's not an acceptable long-term life for her. We may not be able to find her an adoptive home. We may not be able to make her available if she's completely unhandleable. We may not have the resources to find a foster home. But we do have is an excellent rehoming program where if you can hang on to her for a little bit longer and just work with me here, we can find her a new home without her ever having to come into the shelter environment. And thankfully, that conversation went very well. They agreed. We advertised her, we enrolled her in our rehoming program, and we were able to find Hazel a new home without her ever having to come back to the shelter environment, just because we were able to have a really, really positive and constructive conversation that they were open to hearing us out on. Alrighty, so final thoughts. We're on the same team, and that is across the board. We're on the same team as the pets. We're on the same team as the community. We're on the same team as each other. And it's important to come with that in mind for all of our conversations. When we're interacting with the public, we need to work well with the public. The public is our saving grace for these pets. They are on our side. They want the best for animals across the board. So we can use that and really lean into that by assuming the best of why they're here and our conversations with them reflecting that positive disposition. Change is really hard. Change is uncomfortable. It's okay to try some of these things and see that it's not progressing immediately, or that the staff are struggling to implement it, or that we personally are struggling to implement it. Change is not our natural disposition. It takes time and persistence and dedication. So just stick with it. Compassion goes a really long way. Just talking about things differently and being more intentional about how we're talking with people and that we're really hearing them out and empathizing with their situation is extremely helpful, both for our own work satisfaction, positive interactions with the public, and how we can help the pets is vastly benefited from just a little bit more compassion. And finally, helping humans helps pets. So making sure that we have the mentality of community resource counselors and not just intake department is so crucial to really driving home why these intake diversion techniques exist to begin with. It's to help people solve their problems so we can keep pets with their families, or at least keep pets out of the shelter long enough to solve whatever issues might have brought them in there otherwise. So helping humans is what helps pets. Thank you so much for joining me for this conversation. I hope that you find it helpful in implementing changes for how you communicate about intake diversion techniques. Feel free to reach out to me via email at kristen@lynchburghumane.org.